So, in this section of the video, we are going to cover the mindset traps to avoid. Remember, there are certain mindsets or principles that you should have when you go for PMP exams. But also, you should avoid some traps if you want to pass your PMP exam in the first attempt. So, let us go through some of these traps to avoid so that we understand what are normally the usual weak answers and what are normally the usual strong answers. So the first one we are looking at is escalate to sponsor immediately. So in a project environment, as a project manager, or us as project managers, we are employed to run the project. We are employed to execute the project. You only need to go to higher authority like sponsor or project boards or project steering committee when something is above your limit or you need approval. Otherwise, for day-to-day project issues, you're not expected to be going to the sponsor or senior management. So you should be managing the project. So in your PMP exam, you're likely going to see answers like immediately escalate to the sponsor. It's unlikely going to be the answer in most cases. These are usually classified as weak answers. As a project manager, you don't escalate. Understand the issue. Involve the team to resolve the issue. Remember the mindset on involving the team. Involve the team to brainstorm. Involve the team to look for solutions. Involve the team also to implement some of the solutions. So you don't just rush into escalating. If you come across some of the very strict sponsors, the moment you start escalating more into them, they're going to ask you a question which is going to be very, very challenging. They're going to ask you, what are you employed to do? So normally weak answers like immediately escalate to sponsor are likely going to be the answers. Then another weak answer you're likely going to come across is replace, punish a team member first. Projects, it's all about people. From my experience, I can tell you it's supposed to be called people management, not project management, from my own view. You are always working with people. And in most cases, your most skilled people, they're the ones to make mistakes because they are working. Those who are not working, they always avoid mistakes. So if you go into this habit of firing or replacing people, team members in a project, it's going to be a very big challenge, honestly. So you should always make sure that you don't just replace people. Try to understand if someone is very slow in completing their deliverables, try to understand the root cause. Why are they very slow? If there's a conflict, people are not working along together, also try to understand. Don't rush into punishing or even replacing people. So it's very important that you pick this as a weak answer in your PMP exam. That is what I also used for me to pass it in the first attempt. Another weak answer we are going to get is approve change without analysis. Remember the mindset, assess before you take any action. So changes are going to come. There's no way you're going to run a project without changes. Changes will always come. It depends on how you're going to handle the changes. But the best that you can do after receiving any change is to assess or analyze the impact. Don't do the mistake I've seen with other project managers. When they are being asked to analyze the impact, they just look at triple constraints. Triple constraints, you're looking at costs, time, and scope. I can tell you, you have to go beyond that. For example, we also look at the risk. You know, there are some changes when you apply them in a project environment, they might end up creating another risk, which you also need to capture in your risk register. If you want to understand more about risk register, I have a link in the description where you can access a full video in terms of how to manage a risk register. It's a long video, but I think the information inside it is worth it in terms of reading. So when it comes to approval of changes, always make sure the analysis is done. What is the impact on cost? What is the impact on scope, on timelines, on risk, even on quality, even on procurement, on stakeholders. So these changes must be analyzed first. So normally in your PMP exam, these are weak answers you always find there. You are rushing to approve something without analysis, and unlikely that is not going to be an answer. Then ignore stakeholder concerns. This is very important. These are normally weak answers also. When a stakeholder is raising an issue, if it's applicable, to meet with the stakeholder face to face is very important. Where it's not applicable, you can even use the virtual communication. At least try to understand what the stakeholder's concern is all about. Don't ignore. For example, I met a stakeholder who was complaining that the report that we're giving them, it was too detailed. Okay, which means the information which they were getting was not making sense to them. They only wanted to focus on what they. So the best way I resolved that was to meet with the stakeholder, revisit their communication needs, and then from that point onwards, they started understanding. So you don't ignore the stakeholders. Always make sure that you meet with them, understand their concerns, do an assessment, impact assessment. Sometimes you might also want to discuss with the team in terms of what the stakeholder is also requesting. So ignoring a stakeholder concern is normally a weak answer when it comes to a PMP exam. You might find a situation where the first answer is continue with the project and then address the stakeholder after the project, or continue with the iteration and then address the stakeholder issue after a release. In most cases, those are not likely going to be answers. So you need to be very careful. Skip communication and documentation. You see, these are some of the best practice you should always have in a project environment. Okay? You have done your analysis of your stakeholders. You have done analysis of stakeholder needs in terms of communication. Then during your execution, make sure you're communicating. During your monitoring and control phase or process group, just make sure that that communication is actually being done. So don't skip that communication. This is where you might end up creating stakeholders who are not engaged in terms of what is expected in the project, because you're not communicating with them. You're skipping their communication. If they said weekly, if they said fortnightly, or after 1 year or even 6 months, make sure that communication is actually being done. So it's very important in your exam, PMP exam, when you see such answers as skip communication, don't do documentation, or do documentation later, that is unlikely going to be an answer. So this might not be a very exhaustive list of all the weak answers, but you'll find that for your exam, most of them, they fall into these 5 items. Most of them, they fall into this. So if you are able to eliminate some of these answers using these examples, then you'll find that you have enough time to go to the correct answer and to finish the exam. Now, let us look at what are normally considered to be strong answers during your PMP exam. All right? Investigate a root cause. Super. Okay? This is the correct mindset. Each time there's a challenge in a project, it could be conflict, it could be stakeholder disengagement, it could be a vendor dissatisfaction. The best that you can do for the project is to understand what is causing that. What is the root cause? It's going to help you to apply a solution that is going to resolve the problem, instead of applying a solution that is going to resolve the symptoms. So it is quite important that each time there's an issue, projects will always have issues, either from the beginning of the project, in the middle of the project, or even towards the end of the project. They will always have issues and challenges. But as a project manager, the best that you can do, or even if you're a project lead, is to understand the root cause of that problem. The moment you understand the root cause, even brainstorming with the team in terms of solution, or even selecting the best solution for that issue becomes very easy. So in your PMP exam, if you find something that is pointing towards A root cause analysis, root cause investigation, understanding root cause, assessing root cause is likely going to be the answer. Then number 2, in terms of strong answers, meet, collaborate, or even facilitate. Okay. So these are very important terms when you are taking your PMP exams. Okay. You might find certain questions indicating that you have to meet. For example, if there's a concern from say it's a new stakeholder into the project, if there's a concern from the new stakeholder in the project, most likely the best is to meet with them, revisit your stakeholder register, okay, meet with them, make sure the register is containing the information they need. Even if it means you're going to the stakeholder assessment matrix, revisit also. But the best is to meet with the stakeholder, understand their concern. You might be even forced to explain the objectives of the project or the vision of the project and the mission of the project. So meeting with them will help you to get more information, to understand more of their concern, and also to help you to come up with better solutions. So most likely when you find a solution or an answer in a PMP exam, which is going to say meet with the stakeholder, meet with the concerned team member, meet with the vendor, maybe it could be meet with the ICT manager, meet with the senior manager, board member. So most likely that is going to be the answer. The advantage of meeting is you get more information before you start thinking of an answer. Remember, the investigate the root cause issue. Also remember the assess before taking any action mindset. Then collaboration is also very important. In most cases, even from my experience, some of the project issues are resolved through collaboration, which means you are putting people into one meeting, whether virtual or physical, but at least they have an opportunity to suggest solutions. They have opportunity to air their views. They have opportunities to propose the way forward. So collaboration is mostly the best. Don't try to be a dictator where you give the team a solution. Work with them, meet with them, choose a solution, and then move forward. So in your PMP exam, you find something most likely with collaborate, it's likely going to be an answer. But be careful. In some cases, the wording of collaborate is used, but it does not answer the question. Or the first part of it might make sense, but the second part might not make sense. So always read and understand the PMP exam question before you apply some of these mindsets, before you apply some of these strong and weak answers that are expected in a PMP exam. The next one, you need to review your plan, your charter, and agreements. So this is crucial, okay? Charter, plan, and agreement. So let me start with charter. So in charter, a project charter is the one that is going to have a high level objective of the project, dependencies of the project, risks, high level risks of the project, identified stakeholder list of the project. And it's also linked to the 3 main documents that are two main documents that are created before the project charter. That is your business case and your benefits realization plan. Okay. So charter is the document that was used to authorize the start of the project, either by the sponsor or by senior management of the organization. So if it was an authorization document, whenever there's something that is an issue in a project, say for example, the scope is expanding, you have to revisit the charter because there's a section to specify the scope of the project. So always make sure you're having reference to the charter. Any other document that comes, it was building on the high level the details in the charter. The rest were detailed. You go deeper, but they were basing everything else from the charter. So if ever there's an issue in a project, always refer to the charter in terms of objectives, stakeholders, in terms of vision, in terms of mission of the project. So review the charter, In most cases, is likely going to be the answer, but you have to understand the question. Then plan. Plan is very important. Remember, in the planning process group, we have actually 24 processes. And in some of these 24 processes, you're creating a plan for scope. You're also creating a plan for risk management. You're also creating a plan for procurement management, for quality management. You're also creating plan for stakeholder engagement. Okay? So if ever there's going to be in a predictive environment, if ever there's going to be any issue, you are most likely going to refer to those plans. Okay? Remember, we have a project management plan, which has got sub-plans inside. So when you refer to the plan, you might refer to one of those sub-plans. Okay? To understand. Say, for example, there is so much in terms of scope changes in your project environment. You're likely going to go back to your plan. You look at the sub-plan for change management. What did you agree? What did you document is the way or the best way to manage changes throughout the project? Okay. So that is also going to be part of your reference. And in a PMP exam, most likely that is going to be the answer. Review the plan. Okay. Then when it comes to agreements, yes, agreements also are very important. I can give you a good example. I had a situation in one of the projects where the vendor was pushing to get payment as quickly as possible. So after revisiting the agreement, sometimes it's called agreement or it's called a contract. So after revisiting the contract, I had to explain to the vendor that there is no provision to demand payment at any given moment. It was milestone based. So as soon as the milestone is completed, as soon as the end users they have signed off the milestone, then you get paid. So this is an example where you have to refer to agreements or contracts. If you want to understand more about agreements and contracts, I've also created a full video. I'm going to leave a link in the description. You can also watch it from my channel. So in a PMP exam, if there's an answer that is going to refer to review of agreements, it's most likely going to be the answer, but you still have to understand the question. Then the second from last is assess impact before deciding. This is very important. You need to understand the implication of doing any action in a project environment. Say, for example, the implication of replacing someone. Remember, you're not supposed to replace, but there are certain cases, if someone is doing something illegal, definitely you have no option. If someone is breaking the law, definitely you have no option. But before you make that decision, you have to make sure that you have done the proper analysis, you have done the proper assessment of the situation. That is very, very important. Then the last one, but not least, is updating artifacts, okay, and to communicate. So projects, they might run for long periods. I've been involved in projects where we had to go for 3-5 years and so on and so forth. And you find some construction projects, they even take even longer. So things can change, information can come in, and there might be a need to update some of these project artifacts. So how do you do that? You need to make sure that continuously, each time you get any information, what is normally called progressive elaboration, when something becomes very clear as you go deeper and deeper into the project, you need to update all the artifacts. It could be updating even some plans, okay, stakeholder lists, risk register, and so on and so forth. For predictive environments, there are certain artifacts you must get approval from the Change Control Board, CCB, before you change them. And there are other documents like registers, issue register, issue log, risk register. In most cases, you don't need approval to change them. So always make sure that the artifacts are always being updated and they're also being communicated. So if something has been updated, has been changed, make sure people they are aware of what has been changed. So these are the 10 mindset traps. So These are the 10 mindset traps that you should always avoid when it comes to PMP mindset. You're going to find a lot of videos, can I say, YouTubers who are going to talk about mindset. Some of them, of course, they resolve the weak answers. Some of them, of course, they resolve on the strong answers. But don't fall into these specific traps.